Good. So welcome to this second session. Can I just assume, was anybody not at the first session this morning?
Yes.
Really? I mean, at the one we've just done? You weren't there? Okay, well, in that case, you've got a lot to catch up on. Well, in that case, let me just introduce everybody. My name is Jude Kelly. I'm the Artistic Director of the Southbank Centre and the founder of the WOW Festival. And this morning we've been talking about economics, and then we had a second session that was very much about how do you campaign for a better practical world for girls and women across a number of areas. And as part of that discussion, we had Gordon Brown, who needs little introduction, but his current role is the UN Special Envoy for Global Education. And we had Ziauddin Yousafzai, who is the father of Malala, who obviously has now become a world figure because of the family's commitment to girls' education, I would say that, and her particular stand for it. We had a really wonderful opportunity to hear you talk earlier about your commitment as a man to the idea of girls and women. And then, Gordon, you also talked about the absolute urgent need for men to change their sense of what their priorities in the world need to be. And we'll come back to that in a minute. We've got just under an hour before we break. Gordon is then flying up to Scotland. So before we do anything else, we're going to show you a film called The Future Is Hers. It was commissioned by Gordon himself as part of the UN Education Envoy's work. And if you want to see it or comment and learn more about the work, there is a website, uneducationenvoy.org. But we're going to watch this film first, and then this will be the subject of what we discuss. Thank you. Thank you. Good film. And you commissioned it personally?
Yes, because I wanted to focus on those girls and those organised movements of girls that are fighting back. So we looked at child labour and child trafficking, we looked at child marriage, and we looked at, in Malala's case, the discrimination against girls that were preventing Malala and her friends from going to school. And these are some of the reasons why millions of girls are not at school, and it's got to change in the next period. And what's amazing is that there are movements now of girls determined to force that change on adults who have been too complacent about the lack of rights.
Now, yesterday we had a wonderful day here, which was basically a day conference about girls' education, led by girls. And we had 400 girls here who were working out what a gender equality curriculum could look like. And I'll come back to that later. But can you just tell us the significance of the 1,000 days, the 2015, the urgency of saying by 2015 this has to be done?
Yeah, we made a promise in 2000, all the leaders of the world, all the countries of the world, all the international organizations, World Bank, all of them, they made a promise that by 2015 every single girl and boy would be at school, so in primary education. And we started to make good the difference, and 40 million girls and boys did get to school, but there are still 60 million boys and girls not at school. The majority are girls, and of course it's not just they don't go to school. If they go to school, they're only there for a year or two, and the average expenditure on a girl, I said at the last session, in Africa is only $400 for all your education, from the time you're born to the time you're a teenager and would be leaving school. $400 is all that is spent. And aid to Africa for education is only $12 per child per year. And when you think of it, it's barely enough to pay for a school book, far less to pay for education. So there's a huge gap that we've got to make up. And we've got 1,000 days, 3 years and a bit to be able to do that, just under 3 years to do that. And so we've got meetings in April in Washington where we're bringing together all the countries that are failing and getting them to think about how they can actually move this forward. They've either got to take action against child labour or child marriage, or hire teachers or train teachers or build schools, deal with the sanitation problems that prevent girls from going to schools. All these things have got to happen, and then we'll have a further pressure in September. But to be honest, what's missing is a movement of opinion around the world that says to countries that are failing to get girls into school that this is completely unacceptable. And what's necessary is that these countries and these governments and these areas where nothing has been done or little has been done, they've got to come under pressure. Otherwise, things will not change. And I think you know that governments will not do things unless they're under pressure sometimes to do them. And that's really where I think public opinion can make a difference.
When was the promise made?
2000.
Okay, so it was 15 years to try and achieve this goal.
Yeah. And look, how much does it cost to educate a child every year? In Africa and most of Asia, it's only $100 a year. Now, we spend $5,000 or so, roughly, or £5,000 on the education of a child per year. But in Africa, the cost of education is so low that it costs only $100. This is not something that is impossible for financial reasons. The reason it's not happening is there is not sufficient pressure for that to happen. And that's why I think the most exciting thing that's happened over the last few months is the pressure that is coming from girls themselves, that their rights be treated seriously, that they're no longer going to rely on men particularly, but adults simply to be complacent about their prospects. And they're saying, we know that our opportunities are diminished if we never get the chance to go to school, and we want to do something about it. So I think that's the big change, that girls themselves are putting pressure, but we ought to be behind these movements for change, because although many, many things are wrong in the world, education is probably the best way of breaking the cycle of poverty that goes from generation to generation, and we can help by forcing governments to do something about it. Okay,
now Ziauddin, you are already a teacher, an educationalist, an activist in Pakistan. You have championed the idea of education generally all your life, and you have a daughter, Malala, who you gave equal status to and the equal right to education, which is not a norm yet across the world. But I know that you didn't wish and wouldn't have wished for her to be put into a situation where she became such a leader for the idea of a girls' movement for education. But nevertheless, that has happened. And it's good to see her on the film looking like she's going to make a proper recovery. I'm sure she will. But when she does, she'll obviously tell her story in her own way. But this idea that that pivotal moment when she stood up and said, I am Malala, when the Taliban came to find her and took the consequences, has this galvanized in Pakistan and other places a different attitude to girls' education? Can you tell us a bit about what's happened?
Thank you very much. I think even before the tragic assassination of my daughter, she was one of the few who spoke for the rights of the people in Swat Valley in Pakistan. And I can say that she was the only child who could speak. And this she did very consciously, and this she did with a determination. And she knew that what will come. We knew too. But you see, it was very hard time, and when the elders or the stakeholders are the people who have a mandate to ensure the rights of the children, the rights of the people, they keep silent or they compromise to speak the truth for one reason or some other reason, then children have to rise up. So she spoke for long, since 2006, 7, 8, 9, and before the incident, it had a massive effect on the people of Pakistan. One day I was called by phone, a person from a very big town from Pakistan, and he told me that I congratulate you for having such a good daughter, and I have 4 daughters who were out of school, but after seeing your daughter on television, on radio, hearing her, now I have got my daughters to school. So I mean that, and in so many families, people named their daughters after her name. So didn't she become a global icon after the tragic incident? But even before that, she was an inspiration for millions of children and people in Pakistan. And Pakistanis are proud of her. They are proud of her.
The idea of girls standing up for their rights, that Malala sets a fantastic example of that. Are there lots of girls who are now taking over her campaign, joining with her? A lot more voices raised between 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls. Is this happening across Pakistan?
Sure, it's happening, and it happened. You see, we saw many atrocities, many cruelties from the militants in past few years. And we were really very much upset when, for example, one of the governors was assassinated, and so many notables were assassinated. But we didn't see any condemnation from the people, which we were expecting. But in the case of my daughter, we saw, I think it was a massive, condemnation, and people condemned Taliban. And it was for the first time that children, youth, elders, even the parties in the right wing, in the left wing, they raised banners and they said, shame on Taliban, shame on terrorists. It was a big change for Pakistan.
But you made the point earlier, and Gordon also referred to it, which is that it's easy to kind of focus on the Taliban and say, well, that's the problem.
Yeah.
But you were really saying, well, the Taliban are against everything. But the reality for girls' education generally is that it is a more common, widespread disinterest in girls.
You are very right. You are very right that this struggle is not the right of education. It is not because of only the terrorism in our country, but general behavior of the parents in some parts of our country, especially in rural and hilly areas, where girls' education especially is not considered as much important as boys' education. So it is also changing. And you see, as I already talked about it, that it is the basic thing is the change of mindset. Whether you honor your daughter, you trust your daughter, if you trust her, then you give her all her basic rights. The right to go to the school, and I think it's key to all rights. Once she is educated, then she will know all about her duties, about her rights. So a change is coming apart from that as well. And now the people are thinking that there is no way out without education, and they must send their girls to school and boys as well.
I think if I may add, I was in Pakistan just a few days after Malala was shot, and Ziauddin had to leave Pakistan and bring Malala to hospital in Birmingham. And I saw that something I'd never seen when I'd been in Pakistan on a number of occasions before, just this movement of opinion in civil society, if you like. And you had women leading demonstrations. You visited a school, and all the schoolgirls were identifying with Malala. They were wearing headbands, I am Malala, which was a very direct identification with what Malala had experienced, and that they too would stand up for the right to education. You had a petition signed by 2 million people. You had the government then changing its policy. You had 3 million bursaries being offered to students to go to school. You had a plan to double the expenditure on education. They made universal education compulsory in these days after the attempt at Malala's life. And I think things did change in Pakistan, and they could change in other countries as well as a result of people realizing that things can be done. But you've got to deal with child labor, first of all, because there are millions of girls who are in either domestic service or in other forms of child labor and prevented from going to school. Child marriage, 10 million girls a year are married off before the age of 15, and therefore they are taken out of school and forced into loveless marriages that they do not choose. Child trafficking, which is still very widespread, as the film was making clear, when that young girl Ratney was really put into trafficked for 2 years before she was released by a very brave group of people. And then you've got the problems of education, the lack of teachers, the lack of schools, the lack of facilities, the lack of sanitation, as well as the discrimination which is direct, where parents do not think it worthwhile sending the girls in their family, but send the boys to school. So all these things have got to be dealt with in sequence. And I think what's changing is that people in Pakistan recognize that they had been silent too long. And for the first time, I think, as you're saying, Ziauddin, people stood up and were counted and were prepared to be identified with a campaign to get girls to school.
Exactly.
Right. So,
I will add one point to it, that when girls and boys, youth came out and men came out, I think, as Gordon said, that there were massive protests against that assassination attempt. So people associated themselves with her and with the cause. That means it gave a very strong message that the children of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan, will never compromise on education. and they will even defend this right at the cost of their life.
The three things that you talked about before you get to actually getting into education and the issues of facilities and teachers and sanitary conditions and so on, which are forced marriage, child labour and sex trafficking. That idea of a woman being property that can be sold and bartered. I mean, this, of course, this doesn't just apply in Pakistan or what, euphemistically are called developing countries. I mean, the issue of the idea of the commodity of a woman goes through, even in our country, through to the idea of advertising and so on. But we'll do that in other sessions. But the idea of the woman as property, do you think that is something which culturally will change quickly? Well,
the story of Ratni, which was one on the film, is this young girl from the north of India whose parents were told by a family friend that she would have a better chance if they could take her to Delhi for both work and education. And so on the false promise that parents accepted, not knowing their child was to be trafficked, a friend of the family took the girl. That girl was then moved to Delhi. She was forced into domestic labour. She was then taken from that situation to another place for another year of domestic labour, but the person who was the slave master was also brutalising and violating her as a girl, and so there was rape involved in it as well. And it was only because there is this movement, the Global March Against Child Labour, that was advertising at rail stations that, if you're in need of help, come and see us, that she escaped from her slave master and got away. So these things are happening all the time. So the laws in India are not strong enough. The policing of the laws are very poor. And of course, parents, for the wrong reasons, are allowing their children to leave home and therefore be trafficked away. So you need an international movement against this, because some of the children have been moved out of India or out of Pakistan into other countries. You need, if you like, almost a global hotline so that people in any country can actually make their views known. And we've been very slow, I think, to deal with the international trade in trafficking. So that is one area where you could make advances pretty quickly if there was both laws, policing and international cooperation to do it.
Well, I want to ask you about this idea of apathy or disinterest. Because, I'm not putting these things side by side too much, but obviously when there was thoughts of torture in Guantanamo Bay, if there was areas to do with abduction of journalists, there's a whole range of issues where there is universal outcry when torture or forced captivation is in play. But for the whole issue of girls and women, where this is happening all the time, it does seem like the global community just says, well, yes.
And Amartya Sen has proved that girls just disappear from the statistics. So you've got 100 million girls that are not registered on any statistical population or anything.
And why do you think world leaders and governments generally just don't care enough?
Because the pressure from below is not enough for them to take that as a more serious issue than some of the other issues they're dealing with. And when you meet, say, if you take a country like Nigeria's got a huge number of problems. It's got its oil problems, it's got a religious problem, it's got terrorist problems, it's got all the different problems associated with inequalities. So to get yourself onto the agenda of what the president's going to deal with, you've got to press your case. So there are 10 million children out of school in Nigeria. It's the worst offender in the world for the numbers of children out of school, and yet it's one of the richer countries in the developing world. But unless the leaders are forced to deal with this issue by us putting it on the agenda, then the trafficking, the child labour, the discrimination against girls will continue. So it's a mixture of pressure from below and international opinion saying, look, if you want to be a country that is taken seriously in the world, you've got to deal with this problem.
Yes, and both of you are helping create pressure from below or responding to pressure from below. Mobilising girls, mobilising women, mobilising voices in general. To do that, you also have to combat the idea that somehow men are irritated or people are irritated if girls and women are troublesome and demand things. So there is an idea, isn't there, in society that actually behaving yourself doesn't include getting up in arms about something. How do you get girls and women to feel that actually not only do they have permission to complain, they're needed to complain?
Yeah, I think that is changing. Look, I also followed what happened in India after this terrible rape, and we mentioned this earlier in the session, but you could see the demonstrations, and they're still going on in India, and no wonder, because the authorities have been too slow to deal with a problem that everybody knew about, but people had not been out in the streets or campaigning against. But now there is laws before the Indian Parliament, and the irony is, if people take their eyes off this, the trafficking law, the law against child labour that is part of this legislation is just going to be removed. And so where is the pressure? We've got a petition actually, signed by nearly 1 million people already, to the Indian government and the Indian Parliament, telling them that they must use the opportunity to get rid of child trafficking, child labour, and also discrimination against girls. And that's on that same website, www.educationenvoy.org. And Avars, which is a great organisation, is running a petition that has been signed by nearly 1 million people.
Right.
Just to make a point, I think that I'm very much optimistic about the behavior of men towards the girls, towards their daughters, sisters. In past, for example, 30, 40 years ago, I think men were less conscious and less concerned about the rights of the women. But now there is a big change. We see a big change, especially in the educated youth. And I just can compare it with the moment of Martin Luther King Jr. When he was there and he was standing for the rights of the black. Yep. And so many white were joining him. So it's like this that we see in this century, that the girls who are demanding for their basic rights, they see many boys beside them. So this change, I think this is a good sign.
Yeah.
Because in a male-dominated society, change will come, and change could be initiated by men. For example, fathers like me, I'm not only one father, so many fathers. Circumstances brought me into the focus and people know me, but there are more committed parents, more committed fathers than me, who are more committed to education of their daughters, sisters. So we have so many fathers now, so many brothers now, who want their sister to get education. And in male-dominant societies, this is very much important. And the journey which girls can travel in 100 years, if they are accompanied by their male partners, brothers, fathers, it could be just of a few years, 5 years, 6 years.
Right.
The history of the last 100 years shows that things can change very quickly. Racism, anti-apartheid, a whole series of changes that people never thought were possible in their lifetime happening. There's this great story of Richard Nixon when he was Vice President of America in 1959. He went to the celebration of Ghana's independence. So Ghana was becoming independent from Britain, of course, and he was the American representative, and he didn't know what to do, and he was at this celebration. So he walked into the crowd and he started asking people, how does it feel to be free? How does it feel to be free? And then he got to someone who was sort of further along the road and said, how should I know? I come from Alabama. And America did not have civil rights for black citizens in 1959. So things can move, and they can move very quickly, and I think this is what's going to happen, but it needs the public pressure from below.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and I want you to be thinking about what you would like to ask. And this is specifically to come back to your point about facilities in education. Yeah. Because you made 2 points earlier, which was that there's one is the mental desire to allow women to be educated, girls to be educated, and then there's the simple issue of, are there enough schools, are there enough teachers, and in those schools, do they have the right facilities, do they have the right sanitary conditions, etc. I mean, you know, girls often have to take a week off every month to stay at home when they have their periods because the lavatories and the sanitary equipment isn't there for them. So what do you think the most significant pressure is now in terms of formal education?
Well, Ziauddin, and I think we should pay tribute to his courage, because your school was always in danger of being burnt down, and you were under death threats as well. So removing that fear is, of course, an important aspect of it. But there needs to be investment in building schools and building the facilities. We're probably short of about 4 million teachers and 4 million classrooms around the world. And we could train these teachers very quickly, in my view, and we could get people who want to train. I mean, I talked to the Rahul Gandhi in India, and he was quite happy that he had teachers coming from abroad that would be able to teach in India if people were prepared to come and work in India. So it's not just a problem to be solved in one country. There is a global solution with people moving from one country to another, at least temporarily, to help with the creation of more teaching places and teaching posts. Then the building of schools, again, it's not so expensive. It needs a political will to do it. But sanitation, school meals, financial incentives for parents who depend on child labour to send their children to school, and we're about to try that in a number of countries where we've been slow to get rid of child labour. So in return for giving up the income that comes from child labour, we will give the family cash incentives to enable them to send their child to school, and we will offer meals and books to children as they go to school. So that's one way I think we can start to deal with some of these problems.
I want to add to contribute to it. I think that the change in people is there. I mean, in new generation there is a big change. Even in old people, I just heard from Swat a few days back that some 40 years old girl or woman, she wanted to go to school, and she joined a school of 16 years old. So it means that there is a thirst for education in people, but the problem is with the states. And as he mentions usually, that there are, I think, more than half of the 60 million children, they are from 6 countries, I think.
Yes, yes.
So if the states, if the countries who are not paying enough, attention towards education, they must be pressurized, and they should keep education as their top priority. Then change will come, because when state takes interest in something, it is resourceful. It has, I think it can do. It can do. So I think that if the countries where the education rate is very low and millions of children are out of schools, they should set their priorities, and the first one should be education, and education for girls especially.
Okay. So, I mean, I want to thank you and your daughter, because actually in some respects it's not only about making sure that we can support you, it's you've given us a catalyst to have a discussion about our own situation too. And I'd like to thank both of these men for being so committed to girls and women.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well done.